It's budgeted. A lot of it depends on cash flow. What we have to make sure is that we have sufficient revenues coming in to meet those commitments when they become due. Goods and services grew by 11% compared to 2011 and reflects increased spending on road maintenance and payments to contractors and suppliers, as well as transfer payments. Transfer payments declined by 29% since transfers which were made to the ABI Bank in 2011 were not required in 2012. At $37 million, capital expenditure remains below the level of investment that we would want to maintain the capital stock and to fund new infrastructural development projects. Over the past 3 years, average spending on capital projects amounted to about 1.5% of GDP. And just for the record, by way of footnote, I think it's just important to note, Antigua's GDP is roughly 3 billion EC dollars. So many times we hear references to GDP. GDP is going to be your standard figure. You have debt to GDP, you have tax to GDP, you have expenditure in relation to capital to GDP, because the GDP simply represents the size of your economy. And there are certain basic understandings that if you have an economy of a particular size, then you should be able to spend X number of dollars on your roads, your salaries, whatever it is. And so over the past 3 years, it has only amounted to 1.5% of GDP. This is significantly below the average capital expenditure, which was over 7% between 2006 and 2009. We have therefore had to focus over the past few years on maintaining the capital stock, your roads, your buildings, through targeted road repair and a maintenance program. Between January and November of 2012, approximately $14 million was spent on road works to avoid irreversible damage to the road network. The targeted areas have been in communities that have been most affected by the decline in spending on capital works. And the decline in spending on capital works was occasioned because as we experienced a decline in our revenues with the global crisis in 2009 and the crash of Stanford, and coming out of the decimation of the gaming sector, and in addition to that, the British-American crisis with 288 million EC dollars taken out of the economy. These shocks had a significant impact on the economy of Antigua and Barbuda. But in doing that, we took a conscious decision that we would not engage in any retrenchment in order to make things balance. And so we had to take the hit on capital. We would have preferred to be spending much more on capital because capital is growth-inducing. But we decided that we would keep people employed, and that's what we have done. And that's one of the challenges we are having, that at the end of the month, the challenge remains. But we will keep on and we will persevere. Madam Speaker, whilst opportunities to undertake new investment in infrastructure were limited, the government has made payment of outstanding amounts to local contractors and merchants a priority. For example, between January and October of 2012, we made $30 million in payments to contractors and local merchants. Since June of 2010, the government has paid $270 million to contractors, to local merchants, and to suppliers. And I want to say, Madam Speaker, that for most of our 31 years of independence, we have managed our fiscal affairs in such a way that there are so many creditors out there. In fact, without calling his name, there's one very prominent businessman in Antigua and Barbuda. We hear him sometimes on the radio. But he has come to see me time and time again because he's owed money from 1990. And we're trying to see how we can bring these things properly to book so that we can deal with these outstanding amounts. And he's not the only one. There are so many others. And over the period of time, what we've been trying to do is to bring all of these sums to book. Sometimes persons show up in 2010. That has happened. And then they give you a set of invoices which were submitted many, many years ago. and you have to try to make sense of that. We are now putting things on a footing, as I will explain as we go along, so that those things, Madam Speaker, those forms of management, that lax approach to the management of the finances of this country, that those things, Madam Speaker, will be a thing of the past. So in developing and implementing the fiscal consolidation program, this administration was very determined to end this unsustainable approach to managing the country's finances. The impact of this approach will be a primary surplus of 36 million in 2012. This year, a primary surplus. I want to explain again, Madam Speaker, that there's a difference between the overall and the primary. Overall balance and the primary balance. When you're looking at your primary balance, you're taking into account your current expenditure and your current revenue. As I said, like your checkbook. What you put in, what you take out, the difference, that's your balance. But when you take into account your interest payments, which you must honor, then that gives you your overall balance. Now, you will normally fall short on your overall balance, but at the very least, you must try to make sure that your checkbook can balance. That if you put in 10, you don't take out 12. Or else you're going to have to find a way. Because if you do that over several years, that 2 every year is going to build up to about 40. And then you won't be in a position because you would not have prepared for it. And it will place the country, as it has placed countries like Greece, in big problems. Because then when you look at your interest payment alone is almost wiping out your whole budget. So you have no funds left to pay your pensioners, pay your workers, build your roads, buy your chalk for your schools, and that type of thing. That is why, Madam Speaker, I said earlier that insofar as your current balance is concerned, you want to keep that in surplus. That's good management, Madam Speaker. And so we are very proud that for this year, 2012, we will have a primary balance and a surplus of 36 million EC dollars. But that's not the end of the story, because you now have to look to your overall balance. In other words, how are you now going to finance your interest payments? And here is where I will explain where we intend to get the financing in order to finance that overall deficit which we will experience and which we are working to remove from our books. But I will give you the good news as far as the overall balance is concerned in a moment. Madam Speaker, the path of fiscal consolidation has been tough and was made even more difficult because Antigua and Barbuda's form a legacy of broken promises and irresponsible behavior, that these serve to exacerbate a very difficult fiscal situation. This administration, however, is certain that the right course of action to restore our nation's honor and to secure our long-term stability is to pursue the difficult but necessary path of prudent fiscal management. Let us not forget the words of the 7th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. Wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. But narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that leads to life. That's it, Madam Speaker, that's it. You see, kicking the can down the road is always the easy option. Making sure that you just get by to win the next election is always an option. But the question is, for all of us, on both sides of the House, are we ready and have we reached the level of maturity where our primary focus is the next generation rather than the next election? We'll all have to answer that. That's a personal question for all of us. This administration refuses to be seduced by the so-called easy road. Abolish this, so with that. Don't take that decision because people are not going to like it. People are going to fuss. But what about the generation to come? Is it the best thing? So we will not be seduced by the easy road. We will remain on the path that demands hard work, a path that eschews the quick fix and focuses on a deliberate and consistent effort to bring about a desired outcome. In other words, Madam Speaker, to reach out and touch the things, those things which we call the substance of things hoped for. That's where we are, Madam Speaker. Now, with regard to the economic outlook for 2013, so we've seen where 2012 is. What about 2013? What's the outlook? The outlook is that the global economy will grow by approximately 3.6% in 2013. Growth in the advanced economies is projected at just 1.5% for 2013. A resolution of the economic and financial turmoil in the euro area will be essential to alleviate uncertainty and improve economic performance in this very strategic area. Overall, the euro area is expected to grow by 0.2%, and that includes economic powerhouses like Germany. They're taken into account in that equation. By 0.2%, the great Europe in 2013. This outlook is based on the assumptions that policymakers will successfully implement measures and mechanisms that will enhance confidence, lower costs of capital, and stem capital flight. So if they don't get that right, instead of growing by 0.2%, you could see them contracting. Prospects for 2013 in the United States will depend on whether President Obama and U.S. congressional leaders come to some agreement to avoid the impending fiscal cliff. Now, this fiscal cliff that you hear everybody talking about, it refers to the expiration of the Bush-era tax cuts. You remember during the era of George Bush, he had implemented a number of tax cuts which had a finite life. Now, that life comes to an end at the end of this month. Now, unless they're able to come to some sort of agreement as to where the taxes are going to be placed, Obama is saying on the top 2% or the top 1%, I think it is. And if he is not able to get that, then once the fiscal cliff is hit and those tax cuts expire, then the whole of the middle class, everybody in the United States, are going to pay substantially more in taxes. And at the same time as that is happening, you're going to have significant and radical cuts in expenditure. You're going to have cuts in defense, you're going to have cuts in the domestic programs, and there will be, well, some say weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. And what they are afraid of, Madam Speaker, is that if this happens, it could begin that daunting process that we would all not want to see, because it would have a direct impact, not only on foreign direct investment, but also on further visitor spend. But more importantly, it will affect certainty. It will affect confidence. It will affect credibility. You may find the U.S. being downgraded. You may find that persons feel that this is not a place they want to invest their money, and then you have capital flight. Now, with our situation, Madam Speaker, and this is where I'm so happy to always point out the difference that we had. Now, first of all, we cannot print money in Antigua, Madam Speaker. We can't print money. When in 2009, and permit me this digression because the member for City West has raised the question, and I think it's important, because this points to the difference in policies. Now, in 2009, we found ourselves in a situation that I'm not aware that there's any other country in the Caribbean or in this area would have seen a coincidence of such circumstances. And I'll go to them, because many people go on as though it's some sort of coincidence or it's excuses that people are trying to make. What we have is a situation where Antigua and Barbuda is the most tourism-dependent country in the Caribbean. Our two major source markets, the US and the UK, were badly affected by this crisis, leading to a decline in arrivals and yields. That's one. Two, we're just coming out of a situation where the gaming sector, previously employing over 4,000 people under the ALP, and coming down, now employing just under 400 people. That's the reality with a lot of young people who were employed in that sector. Thirdly, British American, $288 million that could have been used in this economy, out of this economy. Thankfully, we are now in a position to start making repayments, and some people will be repaid, but not all. Madam Speaker, these are the realities. But I have not even mentioned the impact of the crash of Stanford. The crash of Stanford. When we, the talented professionals in the ministry, together with outside consultants, quantified the impact of the crash of Stanford, it was 434 million EC dollars, just over 150 or something like that, US dollars. But 434 million EC dollars. That's the reality. That's what we had to face with. And this was not a case where there was a gradual decline. This was a sudden. That was a fiscal cliff if there ever was one. Now, how did we handle that? Now, if we were in a situation as the country was many years ago, with the weak fiscal situation, where the global economy is doing well and still struggling, not struggling because you don't want to do better, struggling because the policies that are being pursued are not creating the level of revenues so that you can meet your obligations. As a result of which, Madam Speaker, what would have happened if we were in that situation? We wouldn't have had the ABST to at least hold you and keep you going. We wouldn't have had the personal income tax to at least hold you and keep you going. But what we had to do, when we looked around, you go to countries, you ask them if they can give you assistance. This is not like before when you have a hurricane and you have a hurricane, but everybody says, okay, so everybody coming to help you. This is a crisis where everybody is in problems. So when you go and ask for help, they say, I have my problems too. You go to him to help. I have my everybody have their problem. Different environment altogether. So that's the first thing. Not only that, having not made those payments to many of the external and the domestic creditors, what that meant was that there was an absence of goodwill. We owed Japan, we owed Brazil, we owed UK, we owed the USA, the Netherlands, France, all of these were owed. You take, for example, Madam Speaker, no, they're the ones who raised it. No one responding, they don't like it. But take the Brazilian loan. There was a Brazilian loan that was taken out in the year 1981 for 5.1 million US dollars. 5.1 million US dollars. Madam Speaker, that loan was never serviced. As a result of which, today, the taxpayers of this country have to be paying back 22 million US dollars for a $5 million loan that was never serviced. And we had to bring them down to 22 because when you took the interest, having never even looked at it, it came to nearly 78 million. But still, we have young people like Mrs. Nadia Spencer-Henry, who's the head of our debt unit. She can stand toe-to-toe with the best in the world, and she has done it and has been able to renegotiate our debt and bring us on a proper sustainable footing. That's what happened. So in 2009, we had to find revenues. And in finding the revenues, we had to take certain tough decisions, or else we would have had to send home people. And we weren't going to do that. We had to find the revenue to pay them. But what would have happened is that those who are saying that in a crisis, they would have abolished income tax. Abolish income tax? That's nearly $50 million that they would have thrown away. When you abolish that, where are you going to find the money to pay the public servants? No, they want me to move on. I'll move on. But you see, that's it. I hope they have learned. You understand? They don't like it. So, Madam Speaker. This is democracy. This is what it is. And, Madam Speaker, as we go forward, this is what it is. No, Madam Speaker, as these issues in Europe and the US remain unresolved, resurgence in the global economy is expected to be slow and bumpy for 2013, which even more places a sacred responsibility on this government not to be reckless, to be prudent, and to make certain that we do those things which are in the best interest of this country. For major trading partners, growth is projected at 2.1% in the United States and 1.1% for the United Kingdom. Based on data available in September, growth in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union for 2013 is expected to be 1.6%. It is expected that Antigua and Barbuda will continue to grow at a rate of 1.7%. This growth in 2013 will be due mainly to expansion in the hotels and restaurant sector, construction activities, manufacturing, wholesale and retail trade, and the real estate sectors. Overall, growth in the ECCU region will depend largely on economic developments in the major advanced economies, especially the euro area and the United States. The IMF's Global Financial Stability Report of October 2012 puts it this way: in the face of fragile financial conditions, failure to decisively resolve the economic instability in the euro area and to forestall sudden and deep fiscal tightening in the United States will result in further depression of growth rates in 2013. Now, going forward, where are we? For Antigua and Barbuda, our strategy, which we put in place in 2009, beginning in 2010, was the National Economic and Social Transformation Plan. The National Economic and Social Transformation Plan has played a critical role in guiding the nation through one of the worst periods in the economic history of the world. Guided by the gentle yet sturdy hand of the Honorable Prime Minister, we have emerged from the storm. Though not unscathed, our nation is stronger for having endured this trial. Our much-touted resilience has been tested, and we can say unequivocally that we are poised to not just persevere, but to thrive. The recovery in economic output in 2012 validates what this administration has stated at every turn. Antigua and Barbuda can realize the economic growth through the concentrated effort of our people to do what is right and responsible in respect to fiscal management and how we treat our creditors. We can stimulate growth by empowering and encouraging our nationals in entrepreneurial pursuits. However, as a small open economy, Antigua and Barbuda will still require foreign direct investment to secure and sustain the high levels of economic growth that we can secure in order to create prosperity for our people. This entrepreneurial drive and investment for economic transformation will not just happen. There must be deliberate interventions that can attract investment and create an environment that creates growth. Such interventions must be determined by policies articulated in an overall development strategy. In this regard, the government established a Strategic Development Committee in March of 2012 to update the National Strategic Development Plan that was approved by Cabinet in May 2011, and to prepare a medium-term strategic development plan, the MTSDP. The medium-term strategic development plan will be underpinned by the following strategic objectives: fiscal balance, education for all, enhancing our social development agenda, preserving our environment and building a stronger physical infrastructure, economic sustainability, and Antigua and Barbuda, the best brand. The first draft of this strategic development plan will be completed by January of 2013, following which the Caribbean Development Bank will provide technical assistance to complete the plan. I see Mr. Dobry Namad, he's here. He has been charged with the responsibility to complete that first draft. Once completed, the medium-term strategic development plan will succeed the NEST plan as the government's blueprint for growth and development over the short to medium term. It should be noted, however, that fiscal and debt sustainability, financial sector stability, social protection, along with promoting economic growth, will remain the underlying principles of this administration's development strategies going forward. Now, fiscal stability. Since assuming office in 2004, the UPP administration has focused on transforming fiscal operations in Antigua and Barbuda. This government was acutely aware that sound fiscal management is essential for sustained growth. Therefore, we immediately began a process of fiscal reform that included streamlining the tax system and rationalizing expenditure. Our intention was to implement the fiscal reforms in a phased manner to gradually consolidate the fiscal position of Antigua and Barbuda. We started to realize the benefits of our early interventions as revenues increased significantly between 2004 and 2007, and expenditure was managed more effectively. Also, due to our success at restructuring and renegotiating a number of long-standing debts, we were able to reduce the debt-to-GDP ratio from 140% in 2004 to 110% in 2009. In 2012, the debt to GDP ratio will fall further to 88% of GDP.